Okay, looks like we're live. So,
Okay.
hey there, this is Dan and you're watching The Salty Sea. I've got here for his second time on the channel. I'm really excited to have him back. So many people loved the first time. This is Adam Shaw. Adam Shaw,
Hello.
Adam, say hello.
Hello there. Thank you for getting me back. I had a great time last time, and yeah, I'm really excited to be talking about this one.
Yeah, me too. I feel like, you know, a lot of sort of content channels, including my own, mostly either talk about the competitive part of the game, or they'll talk about sort of the official background lore quite a bit. Even though, narrative gaming is at least a third of, it's like one of the pillars of the hobby. It's just, I feel like the one we talk about the least. So I'm really excited to have this conversation where we kind of dig into it, how we do it. Yeah, all of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, before we get into it, have you been painting anything lately?
Yeah, I've actually been preparing a Stormcast Warrior Chamber warband for Warcry. We're going to be doing a Soar Off the Core campaign at some point in the future. Obviously, with the pandemic happening at the moment, is kind of put the brakes on any kind of organized campaign locally. But I'm still building one, and it's actually got a very strong narrative background. So I'll be talking about that later on. I've also, just because my first skirmish, my first warband was Skaven back in wartime. This is going back over 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up some cheap Skaven, so I'm putting together a Skaven warband just as a little side project, just as a little palette cleanser with sculpting and converting.
Yeah, I've seen a few of the because these are still the Stormcast, right, with the really cool wooden armor that you did.
That's right. Yeah,
Mhm.
that the wood and the like an ancient bronze and wood effect, and I've posted some of them on Facebook and social media. So they're
Yeah.
still a work in progress, but definitely it was a challenge to try to get the look right. But I
Mhm.
think I did pretty well with the test model, and then from there it almost wrote itself.
Yeah, nice. I'm painting Ardbors right now for Iron Jaws. I've never painted any Iron Jaws before, but I got the Warcry box set. I got it actually back in fall, right when it came out, but it's only just been warm enough to prime pretty recently. So I've been trying to paint them along with the brutes, where trying to make it so that the normal metal armor kind of looks like bone. Um, had the idea for they have been fighting Ossiarch Bone Reapers because their favorite city of humans to fight. They come over every few years to, just try to burn down the city and just have a good fight doing it. And the Bone Reapers came to take a bone tithe, and the city was way weaker and didn't fight as well. So then they got mad at the Bone Reapers and decided to wage war against them. So they've made armor out of the plates of the Bone Reapers that they've beaten.
Nice.
It's I'm not quite a good enough hobbyist to pull it off, but it's really exciting, and it's been a while since I've painted something that challenged myself. So um, I'm pretty excited about it. So yeah, let's just get in then, straight into like when and why you start writing a narrative for a given army or war band, or anything that you've got on the table.
As far as the timescale, usually before I'm a planner. I definitely
Mm-hmm.
sketch things out. I do a lot of theory crafting, a lot of maths hammer beforehand, and before I even put something together, sometimes even before I buy things, because I am on a bit of a budget.
Yeah.
I plan out my purchases. So to do that, I make a list beforehand and then look. Okay, do I have something that I can kit bash? Do I have something I can get for cheap? So it's at that point, it's at the list crafting. I look at, okay, who are these guys? What are they fighting for? What's their unique hook? Because I like to have a unique hook for all of my war bands, whether it's where they're from or in the style they're fighting. I've done entire war bands or kill teams proxied and counts as based on a specific theme. So I
Mm-hmm.
plan and I plan again before I even pick up a paintbrush. And it's at that point I write the narrative to try to then inform the decisions I make with what I'm going to be doing, how I'm going to be painting it, even what models I'm going to be choosing. As for the why, and I know in our first video, I mentioned that I find it rewarding. I'm very much a narrative player because I've grown up playing RPGs, and I've grown up playing video games where you have a sense of progression, and that really speaks to me, where you start off with this band of nobodies, and then the more you fight, it takes them on their journey, and you just build and you build, and you learn more about your characters as you go along. And I said, sometimes the narrative writes itself. Sometimes you might get inspiration from an event, and sometimes you'll just wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking, that's perfect, that's what they were thinking. And then the narrative will flow from there. So it's like a nice organic growth, rather than just having a one-off of points values. You're saying these are your dudes or your dudettes, and they are growing with you. So they're kind of on a journey with you, which I find really rewarding.
Yeah, I like when I see people who've got some trophies in their army or in their warband where it's like from some of the notable wins they've had, you know, like over the course of playing them. Of course, only the wins count, right? The losses, you know, they happened for your opponent, but against like a random faceless group of dudes, right? They didn't happen to you. But yeah, I really like it when I see, you know, people who have modeled little trophies on there from, you know, if they took out some Skaven, there will be just like some rats on the base or something like that. For me, I often, like when I started, a lot of the time the lore would kind of be enough for me. Like when I painted some Space Marines, I just sort of painted Raven Guard. You know, I didn't make my own chapter. Partly was I was a little less invested in 40K. I was kind of just painting it because a buddy of mine plays 40K, and I just wanted to have something to play with him, right? So I started, and it did make me get into Raven Guard lore because, you know, when you're painting the dudes, I'll talk about this in some sections later, but you just can't help but to just kind of dive into it because you're just spending so much time with them in your hand that you just really get to know them. But it started off, you know, very much the official lore that they gave to me, and so it's sort of a fine line sometimes where I get inspired by the official lore that they give us, but I don't always, like, it doesn't always exactly fit for me. And so for me, that's when I start going into writing my own narrative a lot. Do you usually kind of look much at the lore of the faction, or do you like to just totally go from scratch yourself?
I like to know the basis of the lore, so I can use that as a jumping off point, because sometimes it's an inspiration, and sometimes it's good to have that context. Like for the Stormcast, what I found very interesting was some of the later lore, which was introduced, I think, from Soul Wars onwards, where you had people remembering, you know, Stormcast remembering their early lives, and rather than at launch they were just ranks of gold and blue Sigmarines who were just, let's do the job, let's hit people with hammers, no personality. From, you know, Age of Sigmar version 2 from Soul Wars onwards, they started having, okay, this person was from this person in life, and so they've carried something forward. And sometimes it's just, you know, a personality trait, and sometimes they remember entire swathes of their past life. So that opens the door for the narrative. So if they hadn't put that, you could say, okay, my warrior chamber remember their past life in an exception to everything that's gone before, and it would be, you know, complete aberration. But the fact that there's official precedent for that, something you can hook onto, and, you know, you make it your own. Like I said, you know, you take the official lore and then you trim it to purpose, but you need, or not quite permission, but having a precedent and an example to inspire you. You can say, okay, now, you know, I can work with that, and then I can shape it to my own narrative. And I find that really helps.
Yeah, it makes you feel more grounded. And so it was the last Stormcast book, right, where they started having sub-factions that where some of them were like, this Stormcast chamber, they were all this type of person in the past life, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't like that in the first two. I didn't actually read the first two, so I'm not sure.
When it first came out, it was very much like they are all warriors of Sigmar, they are all brave, they are all bold, they are all good. And then it
That gets
started
a little
delving
boring.
into like, yeah, exactly. They were all Ultramarines basically.
Right.
And sorry,
The
Ultramarine
worst,
players.
the worst
Sorry.
Space Marine action. No, it's okay. We can say it.
Yeah. Apart from Captain Titus, of course, he's the exception.
Okay.
But yeah, then they started exploring to say, yeah, these guys are technically the good guys. Like there was, I think it was the Knights Excelsior in
Oh yeah, they're
one of the short
bastards.
stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they just massacred civilians just in case. You know,
Right.
and it's kind of exploring a bit like how the different Space Marine chapters have different temperaments, different ways of working. Some are complete zealots, some love their fellow people. And the one that really resonated with me was Hamilcar Bear Eater, who's pretty much like a Salamander's Space Marine, you know, or
Yeah.
Space Wolf. You know, he's human, but he's just twice as big, and he's powerful, and he's got this responsibility, but he still feels like a human. He's written like a human. He remembers, you know, his old life. And so when they opened the door to that, that really kind of granted the idea that yeah, you can do that, and it wouldn't be completely at odds with the existing law.
Yeah, I snagged, actually, luckily, a free copy of the Neve Black Talon book, where she kind of starts the book in that kind of robot kind of way, and then remembers her past life halfway through the book and becomes a totally different character at the end. And yeah, certainly made her much more interesting by the end of the book than she was at the beginning. So I definitely think that helps. So then, yeah, let's talk about then sort of the tools that they give you, right? Since we've been talking about doing these stormcasts based on the lore plus our own imagination, I did want to, since I mostly cover Warcry on the channel, I did want to just talk quickly about the background generator that they do in Warcry. They do this just slightly more expanded in the codexes and battle tomes, I think, as well, for Age of Sigmar and 40K. But yeah, so here on the screen is one of the ones in the Warcry Grand Alliance books, where they've got, this is Iron Jaws, so they've got first names, origin, and leader or your favorite warrior's background. Do you use these tables much?
I do. I find that they're a really good jumping off point. I use Varenscribe on my phone because that's actually a really good tool. It took a while to get updated, but once it was updated, you know, it's really solid tool for list building. Yeah. And the fact that it's just got like a random selection button, you're just like, okay, hit the button, hit the button, hit the button until something that speaks to you comes up. And then, you know, you can change one of the names, but sometimes you'd be like, yeah, actually, that name really suits that guy. Maybe you can use it verbatim. Maybe you can use it with, you know, different last name, different first name. So as a jumping off point, it's a really good one. The origin and the background, I think it's good maybe as inspiration rather than using it straight from the book. I wouldn't roll a dice on it because I want to have that control of the background. I wouldn't want to roll a dice and end up with a background that just doesn't speak to me at all.
Yeah, same.
But sometimes, you know, have a look through and be like, oh yeah, that backstory is good. I could explore that. And then rather than using exactly what's written that, again, that's like a jumping point, and then you can join the dots and like I said, use your own imagination based on something official to begin with.
Yeah, I use the name generator specifically, like religiously, because I have a tough time getting the sort of the feel of the names. I don't usually pick something from the name generator, but I absolutely read all of the first names, all of the last names, and then kind of pick something that's a little bit, you know, like similar-ish, right? Like for my Gloomspite Gits, I took a first name that was kind of along the lines of the first names they had, and then I picked a last name verbatim off of the table. I definitely do that, and I always browse the origin and background. But like you said, it's more to get inspiration to do something else. But I am really glad they have this here, and I'm glad that they do it in the other types of books they have too, just because um, it, like you said, it's a good jumping off point, even if I almost never use it, even if I hear some people make fun of it sometimes. It's so much better than nothing, right? It just,
Yeah, definitely.
if they didn't do anything, it would be rough.
Yeah. And like I said, like if you go back, say, like 20 years ago, I started playing 40k in the late 90s. And back then there was literally nothing. It was just unit names, point values, have fun, make your own things. So yeah, nowadays, the fact that they give you that option, even if you're not going to delve deeper into it,
Mhm.
you can at least have something, have a background, and they encourage the narrative, which I think is a really good approach because it is, like you said, one of the pillars of playing that doesn't get a lot of coverage, doesn't get a lot of push.
Mhm. One of the other things I love in these, like in these types of tables, so in the battle tomes or even in the war cries or the blurbs for the Grand Alliance, it's really detailed, which is awesome. I love reading it. But for these things, the bolded little paragraph right at the beginning, they all have this in the Warcry Grand Alliance books, where it's just like 2 or 3 sentences that just do such a great job. If you ever want to explain a faction to someone, that one paragraph that they put at the top of these ones is just always the perfect thing. Like, what are Iron Jaws? They're big orcs with armor and giant weapons that look way too big.
Yeah,
And that's all you need to know.
exactly. Yeah, and the fact they do it in a completely narrative way, rather than saying these ones have a higher toughness, they are
Right.
slow, but they are tough. So it doesn't sum it up in terms of stats, it doesn't sum it up in terms of points values. It's literally, this is the background, this is what they would look like. If you were there in person, these would be your thoughts when you saw one for the first time.
Yeah. 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 Which is sort of exactly what you want from the background generator. Not something that's going to actually do it for you, even though it says it will. Just something that will give you a skeleton that you can put all of the flesh and skin on and organs and all of that.
Yeah, unless
Yeah.
you're playing skeletons, in which case,
You're there
just get the
already.
bones.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so when we were planning this out over the last week, you actually wrote down a matrix that I really loved and wanted to talk about just in terms of relative to like how deep you go when you're making narrative for your group, because you know you don't have to, right? No one has to write a narrative for their warband, and it's not a prerequisite for loving your dudes, right? But
Yeah.
there's really good ideas here in terms of sort of what it means, like how far you can go into something, and times when certainly I've gone different levels in each of these sort of things. So, um, yeah, we didn't get to talk like verbally over this. So, what made you kind of think of writing it out this way?
'Cause I was thinking that, as you said, it is one of the pillars, and I was trying to think of the three things that really make up the hobby for me. There is the story, the lore. There's the physical hobby side, so the painting and the modeling, which I'm a great lover of. I actually paint and well, I model. I don't paint as much. There's a lot of great plastic in my collection.
Hmm.
I but I model much more than I game. But when I do play games, there's also the army composition or the warband composition, and even the decisions you make in game. And then I thought, yeah, you could either go, dip your toe in it, you could dabble in it, or you could go, fairly full in, or you could just give yourself completely over to the narrative. And I've actually done all of these things. And I was
Hmm.
just trying to categorize it to say, okay, you could go medium strength on the composition, and this is probably what it would look like. Um, so I don't know whether you'd agree with me or other people would agree with me, but I separate out theme and narrative as, say, two sides of the same coin, and it's very subjective. And I think the first line, the basic one, is more heavily into themes rather than narrative. So the way I see a themed warband or army compared to a narrative warband or army, I say the theme is how you tell the story from an external point to others, how well your warband or your army conveys it, just in way it looks, the paint jobs, the story that's told by the models. Whereas the narrative, you used the term when we were chatting about headcanon. So the narrative is your headcanon. It's what you write inside your head about your people. Like, you know, these people have done these. You know, this is the story. And again, that can come out in the theme, that can come out in the modeling and conversion. So I've done the very basic ones. I also collect shadow stalkers. I got it from the catacombs, and I'm painting those up. And I haven't written any particular theme, and I haven't written any particular background for them, other than, you know, they are on a mission. They are, you know, very similar to the established lore. They're going there to try to find the Varan metal. I haven't really done much in the way of painting and modeling, apart from just to try to make them look like they're turning into smoke, because that's how I imagine them fighting. So that's where that theme comes from. And they've got an ally assassin from the cities, and so I would put it down as Anvil Guard, because that's closest to how I think they would fight. So with the mechanics of that, compared to my Stormcast, where I've actually written a full background, I've written a piece of fiction about where they come from. So that would be the extreme writing backstory.
Right.
I've converted them to have their own weapons. So like, if they were given a rack of weapons, the ones I think on an individual basis they would go and pick. In one case, instead of a soul star mace, I've modeled on a huge boulder with moss and vines on a stick, because I've seen that in various video games and RPGs, you know, just this huge, it's like a Dark Souls style rock on a stick, which would hit just as hard, but it fits their background and fits their narrative. And the composition about, you know, actually changing what decisions you make in game, switching systems a little bit, I made a Mechanicus kill team for Kill Team, and one of them replaced his entire arm with a plasma cannon. And there's no plasma cannons in game, but there's plasma guns which you can overcharge to do more damage, but at the risk of burning your own arm off. And so I thought, okay, with something that big, and he's kind of crazy, he trusts in luck, he would never not fire it overcharged. So when playing, always play overcharged. And so that kind of dictates how I play. Even though it might not be the most tactically sound way of doing things, I might not need to overcharge it, but this person, this fighter, would always fire full power regardless of the risk. And so that's what happens in game.
Yeah. Well, I like that, because it's so tempting to like go, so the deeper you get into the game, it's really tempting to just play the ones that are best, especially if you're the type of person, I know a lot of people who are like this, me less so, but when you're playing a model and it's underperforming, some folks will just get really frustrated with it, and then just never want to pick it up again. And just, so the more times you play your warband, the closest it comes to whatever the, you know, most optimized sort of net list is. And I have no problem, by the way, with people net listing for tournaments or just any kind of competitive situation. You know, if the idea is to win, do what you got to do to win, right? Attack the meta however you need to. But I do find that giving a narrative reason for something to be suboptimal can allow you to just have a lot more fun with your casual games. If that way, you just never have to worry about a suboptimal unit, or if there's something in your army that you're just like for a really spiky sort of competitive player, you might at first be thinking, well, I'm only playing this because my buddy who mostly just drinks when he plays, like, I'd run him over and he wouldn't be my buddy anymore if we were playing. if you can kind of make a narrative reason to have it in your army, I find it stops people from getting frustrated with that suboptimal unit. Like what you've got,
Yeah.
like advanced composition in your matrix, right? Like these guys come from the plains, so they've got a ton of cavalry. The cavalry is kind of not that good in the meta at the moment. Maybe it'll get rewritten in 2 years, but at the moment it's not that great. But you don't feel bad having it if you've got sort of a narrative reason to put it in. And then I wanted to get into the painting and modeling is interesting to me because I think I do it in a really different order than you do. I usually just pick a paint scheme that I think looks cool, and then any kind of backstory I write comes while I'm painting. So I'll usually do the painting, and I haven't done a lot of conversions. I've only done conversions on one force that I've done, but um, I'll do, yeah, I'll just pick the color scheme based on like, I'll look at a color wheel, look at, um, I have like I'll put in MS Paint and do a few like test ones, and then when I get to something, I do that, and then as I'm doing it is when I decide. So like the Iron Jaws I talked about at the start of the show, all the stuff with OCR Bone Reapers and their rivalry with a warband I've never collected once. Um, it's all just based out of the fact that I just liked how the kind of cream and brown armor went with the green skin, right? And that's the only way it started, and it kind of all naturally went from there for me. Um, but it sounds like you kind of go the opposite direction where you'll think about backstory first and then model.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for my Stormcast, you were mentioning the wood and the bronze effect.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, that was I happened to have a spare Stormcast model lying around, and I thought, oh, this will look pretty good with like a wood effect shield. Gave it a go. It turned out pretty good as a test model, and then started thinking about what circumstances would lead to somebody to have this armor and this wood. And I was thinking things like like the druid archetype from Dungeons and Dragons or World of Warcraft, where
Mm-hmm.
it might be like a forest guardian, something in a temple that's come to life. And then,
Right.
okay, so they're in a forest. How did they get there? And it just kind of, you ask questions about the narrative and start making decisions from that. And that's what I mean about it writing itself. We just doing some self-inquiry about the stories. How did they get there? Why did they get there? Why is their
Mm-hmm.
armor like that? Why have they got living wood on there? Do they have a connection with the forest? Did they live in the forest? And it just went from that.
Yeah.
That was after one model, and then I ended up getting some other models from the Mortal Realms magazine, and I had some spares from when I first started collecting a couple of years ago, which I'd never assembled, so I dug them out,
Mm-hmm.
and based all of those, I assembled them and converted them and resculpted them according to the narrative, just from asking the questions about why do they look like that in the first place? Why have they got armor? Why have they got that? And I already had the narrative and the backstory done, so I just had to make a model for each of these characters that I had set up in my mind, and like the different archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
They come from a forest community, so they wouldn't be warriors, they wouldn't be generals, they would be villagers. And again, this is going back to my RPG background. When you go
Yeah.
into like a village in Final Fantasy, you will have an innkeeper, you will have somebody, a craftsman who builds weapons for you, and so on. And I just tried to base them off the normal people like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
that informed the modeling and the painting and even the weapons.
That's really cool. So yeah, then the last thing I wanted to just mention with this is I think that this sort of matrix is a really good guide for if someone's not feeling the kind of creative drive to want to get really deep into it. The basic line I think is really easy to get into and can still be really rewarding, with your dudes, right, and your dudettes. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just really like this as kind of a framework to think about, how deep you want to go, and you know, you can decide that you're going to get really intense into the, you know, the composition of your warband and not too much worry about the backstory, and that's fine, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, you can kind of
yeah,
find yourself in any part of this axis, so that's kind of cool.
yeah, exactly. I think you said, you know, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with having minimal or no narrative background if that's what you choose.
Hmm.
But personally, I love the narrative side of things, and you know the options are there. It's such you know a sliding scale that either one is there. There's no wrong answer, which is I think the beauty of the hobby. It's your hobby, and you can do whatever level you feel comfortable with, and whatever level works with you.
Yeah, and I think part of the strength of, you know, Warhammer as a game compared to, say, like my other game, Vice, which is Magic, is that it's just very cinematic on the board, right? And I do think that having a bit of a story really helps with that. And then playing games also helps you create a story too, which can go really well. So then we've mostly gotten into sort of where we get our inspiration from, but I just wanted to put it directly out there. You know, I said a little bit about, like, I start with working on a paint scheme, and then I go into it via, like, as I'm painting them, I think about what kind of thing would justify this paint scheme. Um, but I've also done it with kind of looking at lore background, like we've said, um, like my Stormcast or like that. I started off by just lifting the Tempest Lords subfaction, um, and and then adding to it from there. Do you? I know we've kind of covered a little bit of it already, but do you kind of get inspiration from anything you haven't gotten to talk about yet?
Yeah, I get um, I just kind of like hoard inspiration and concepts just from pop culture. I mentioned video games and books. I did one of my unmade warband was based on the video game Silent Hill, which I've mentioned in previously when we talked,
Hmm.
and that was actually inspired from an article in White Dwarf about, you know, these are the original 6 war bands, and it said about the unmade being like characters from a horror movie. I thought, okay, so I actually converted some of them to have horror movie tropes and references to horror movies. Like I've got one
Nice.
crab walking, like Reagan in The Exorcist, or the girl from Ringu. Um, I've got one missing a jawbone, which he's mounted on his belt, which is a reference to Ju-on. I've got just like obscure horror movies.
Uh-huh.
Um, and even watching Mulan with my daughter, seeing how, you know, seeing the bad guy and thinking he would make a really good, you know, big, you know, ogre leader, you know, painting him up with the grey skin and the yellow and red eyes. Um, and, you know, sometimes I'll get ideas and then be have to like, no, bad, you know, don't do that. That's, you know, you've already got like 5 other projects. Don't get down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And so I'll just file them away for later, and then
Uh-huh.
sometimes I'll go back to them if I have the chance. But yeah, it's like a real grab bag of inspiration, and those kind of make the theme or the concept, and then from there, you know, maybe I'll put together a test model, and then that can then inform the narrative. And usually I do go for theme first, build things from the theme, and then make the narrative afterwards. Um, so the Stormcast are a real exception in my usual MO, in that I've built the narrative pretty much from the ground up before I even started modeling anything.
Hmm.
But usually it is, I'll get an idea from something I've read or I've played or I've watched, and then I'll think how it can apply to something in game, and then just see if I can fit it in, and then write some background to kind of justify it and bring it to life.
Yeah. And then I did want to just go into just a few common ones that it feels like we neither of us really go to, but I think could work for a lot of other people. One is going into your first couple games. You know, you painted it. Maybe you're kind of new, right? So you painted it mostly like the box art. Nothing wrong with that, right? The box art is how it is for a reason, because it's like a really pretty good color scheme for the models usually. Um, and it's usually something that, you know, if you try it as a beginner, you won't totally fall on your face. The new Lumineth Realm Lords, I'm pretty sure if a beginner tried that, I'm pretty sure if I tried that color scheme, I'd fall on my face. But, you know, not most of them, that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
So then a lot of the time you can kind of go into your first game not really having done much narrative writing on your own, but you can kind of just create your narrative as you play that first game and then theme everything around what would it be like to have been a part of this battle or this skirmish or, you know, this fight. And that can kind of inform all the rest of your sort of decisions and headcanon about your force. And I think, you know, that can go really well. And that's, I think, part of why the campaign materials work well for that kind of thing. Um, do you much like let the campaign that you're on, do you let the kind of narrative blurb of the campaign really change what your warband's up to at all?
Yeah, actually, my unmade, they were the ones that started with a theme, and they didn't have a lot of individual narrative. But as I was modeling them, I was like, okay, you know, this guy used to follow the leader, and now he's the second in command, and he's, you know, the jealous, backstabbing, sneaky type, which kind of grew. But as I did the campaign, I played through the Song of Suffering campaign, which ends with you taking a battle with this machine that's screaming waves of pain over the realm, and then you smash it and take bits of it. And one of the background generators, which because it's my first warband, I was using those as inspiration, was just like this strange twitching and gibbering for my leader. And I thought, okay, after that, how about instead of doing the strange gibbering, she's actually trying to imitate the song, and so now she's kind of screaming this ear
Yeah.
piercing, almost like a noise marine style thing, because she's got the warlord trait where if you're nearby, then you get weaker, you know, lower the strength, lower the attacks, which would make sense that if you've got somebody screaming in your ears, it's going to put you off a bit. So it kind of went from that, which is a little, you know, nod to the fact that, yeah, they've done that campaign and this is what they've learned from it. And this isn't something that I've written down. It is headcanon, but it matches the mechanics. And so, you know, I'll be able to say, you know, if I'm playing, you know, okay, she's within 3 inches and, you know, she's screaming and babbling, so you are, you know, -1 strength, -1 attack because of that. So it just gives a little bit more depth, a little bit more context. And yes, it's like a little battle honor, the fact that they've done this and they've ended up with this, and it just gives it some context.
Yeah, so like they give that to you and then you jump off from there. It's sort of the
Exactly.
interaction
Yeah.
between it. Yeah.
And it kind of integrates between this. It's quite symbiotic. That you can take the, they said the information they've given, and rather than rewriting the quest background, you're taking the quest background verbatim, and then you're thinking, okay, how would it affect my warband? You know, you live through that. You know, well, some of them live through that, and then you know, what happens to the survivors? What do they learn from it? How has it changed them? Because I think that's one of the big things about narrative play and growth, is that it's not static. They do change. They grow. Sometimes they grow stronger. Sometimes they get injured. And, you know, you can either dump an injured person or you can keep them on there and work that into your backstory. I've cut off limbs and resculpted, you know, stumps or prosthetic arms and hooks if somebody's got permanently injured, because I want to keep them on there because they're part of the story.
Yeah, that's getting into it, folks. If you really want to go all the way in, that's really cool. That's really getting into it. I've got a Stormcast where I lost her shield arm for some reason. It's one of the like plug and play. I need to come up with something like that. I need to like read stuff, the like stump of an arm onto her shield arm so that I can say like she lost it, you know, as holding a shield wall against some kind of giant doom bull or something.
Yeah. And you mentioned before about not feeling so bad if you're like expecting your people to fail. it means that if there's somebody who is injured, if you think of it in a total mechanic sense, like you're saying, okay, for this campaign, they're a liability, I could get rid of them, I could just replace them with an identical uninjured person. Or you could say, okay, so they've lost an arm, they are down one toughness or whatever in game, but it makes narrative sense for them to, if they're loyal to the warband, you keep them on there, and then you don't mind if they die first. You don't mind because you're kind of expecting them to fail because of that. You're setting yourself up for that narrative, that little narrative buffer for failure.
Yeah. So I wanted to go straight into my Stormcast then, because I wanted to start with them. We'll each go for a couple examples. We've given some, but we'll do more detail. I wanted to start with my Stormcast because this is I was much newer to the game. I thought this is the first group that I ever did the narrative for. And I took the first step of inspiration almost entirely from one of the sub-factions. So this was right when AOS 2.0 was coming out, and they gave us kind of the sub-storm hosts. And they existed before, but there was just less about them. There was less sort of mechanically tied to the narrative. So I picked Tempest Lords kind of ironically. So here's a Tempest Lord probably about to lose to a Doom Bowl, but his buddies are there. They'll help him out, I'm sure, once he loses. But so I picked them ironically because this was when I started off deciding that witch elves were too hard. I got the sort of the box back when it was the knife carriage and then just 10 witch elves, and I stabbed my fingers like 20 times trying to put those things together. They're just like the most spindly and sharp. Some factions in this game, they've got all these blunt weapons. It's even better in 40k, right? Everyone's got guns. You can't hurt yourself putting guns together. But like some of the fantasy factions, the weapons they model them with are actually sharp, and the witch elf knives are one of them. I like nearly drew blood dozens of times putting them together. Painting them was a mess because I was much worse at painting them than I am now. So it was harrowing, and so I switched to Stormcast. I was kind of mad about it, and so the Stormcast lore, as you said, they started off all Ultramarines, right? And then so I picked red, white, and blue, Team America World Police, just sort of ironically, just to be like, listen, I don't like these guys. I'm painting them for now because they're really cheap, right? Because especially on eBay, right? They just practically give Stormcast away if you're patient, right? The boxes aren't that cheap, but they, the in-store promotions and stuff like that, you can oftentimes get like small units for really cheap. And then they're just like blocky and easy to paint. So I start painting them this red, white, and blue scheme that I've gone to make fun of them. It's the Tempest Lord scheme. And then I'm just reading Tempest Lord's background, just kind of accidentally. And the whole thing about how they're all sort of famed orators in their past lives who all come together, and their main thing, I mean, yes, they fight, but like their goal is to inspire as many people to raise as big an army of, regular cities folks as they can before the fight. And like I kind of got into that and sort of gave them all sort of still ironic, like my Lord Arcanum on Thundercat, her name is Verbosha because she's so verbose. But like I got really into the idea of these are all just people who just won't stop talking. So I went and got a bunch of Sacrosanct because I just thought it fit really well, even though none of the Tempest Lords none of the Tempest Lords background sort of talks about sacrosanct. They talk about mostly just command abilities, which fits with their talking a lot, right? It's like, you know, you talk a lot, so you have more command abilities because you're commanding, you're yelling out commands and talking. So, but I went with a bunch of sacrosanct because I felt like the people who just can't stop blabbering on, even during battle, it'd be great. Like, it's a perfect fit for wizards, right? Because they're going to be casting spells, they're going to be doing all that. And so it was this thing where the backstory I started writing in my head, and this is part of why your Matrix inspired me, is it kind of explained to me something that I had been thinking about but not exactly sure of. Is that's what that's what got me into playing the specific type of Stormcast I was because the paint scheme had dictated certain lore to me, and then I went from the lore that was dictated to me to adding onto it. Like, not only are they fine orators, but they literally won't stop orating. They just are constantly talking the entire battle. And like before the battle, they just, every single person in my army loves to hear themselves talk. And so then that got me into Sacrosanct, which a lot of robes to paint. So I've learned how to do that now. And so, yeah, the whole thing came from there. And it went to this thing where I started painting them just to like learn how to paint while I decided on what I actually wanted to do. And I went from there into actually really liking them and unironically just being super into Tempest's Eye, the city of Sigmar where the Tempest Lords live. And you know, they're the only official subfaction of Stormcast that I have any interest in, but I just really like them in general. I'm like kind of desperate for, I've heard rumors that in the next edition of Age of Sigmar they're going to release the like unnamed character for every subfaction, and I'm just like really excited for the Tempest Lords one and praying that it's some sort of sacrosanct and that I don't have to go back to Warrior Chamber. So yeah, that's where I went with it. What would your first example be?
My first example would be my first warband, the one I learned to play Warcry with, which would be the Unmade, which I called the Silence, as a very unsubtle reference to the fact that I based it from Silent Hill.
Right.
Because I always preferred Silent Hill to Resident Evil. It had very much like a creepy horror movie vibe to it. And like I said, I read the article that said they were like horror movie villains. They were, you know, like creepy. They were scary. They were these weird cannibals that hung out in the 8 points. And when I was choosing what my first warband was going to be, it was actually going to be a toss-up between the Cypherlords and the Unmade. And I had some ideas for the Unmade. I also had quite a good theme for the Cypherlords, because reading about how they were you know, able to teleport these minions around, and they were just, you know, mind blank slaves. I was going to paint the minions up as either like golems or constructs, or try to do them as like beings of energy, like with glowing skin, and then the Thrallmaster with like color coded gems, almost like Thanos and his Infinity Gauntlet, like controlling these individual beings. And by just summoning like Jinn just onto the battlefield and zipping them around. I did end up going for the Unmade, and I didn't like the original Blissful One pose with her him standing up on stilts. And I thought, what would be scarier rather than somebody, you know, pogoing towards you with blades in hand? Given that they were really fast, and again, this is me doing, like, I research all the war bands and think, okay, you know, what kind of thing would suit for me? And I thought, okay, they're really, really choppy in combat, and they're very, very, very fast. And what would be scary? And I thought what would be scary would be somebody on all fours, like skittering towards you, like Voldo from Soul
Yeah,
Calibur.
yeah, I used to play that game.
Yeah.
I was a
And,
Cassandra
you know,
player, but yeah.
Oh, okay. I played Voldo and a bit of Yoshimitsu when he was imported in. I was always a Yoshimitsu Tekken player.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
play
I
all
wanted something.
just like the kind of bull rush character. So Cassandra's the one where she's basically just holding up her shield and charging you and trying to stab you. And like I play almost no defense. I'm just trying to like mix up where the
Yeah,
attack is so it's harder to block, and that's the only way I play those games. But
yeah.
yeah, anyway, go
I
on.
was That's good. Yeah, actually, in all the games I play, usually video games and even Magic the Gathering, I had a deck called, I refer to as my Yoshimitsu deck,
Hmm.
because it was all out power. It was lots of tricky stuff and redrawing, and you may not win, but at least you'll have fun and look good doing it. You
Yeah.
turn yourself into a helicopter, fly over, drop down behind them, and you could,
Uh-huh.
just have like full Phoenix, deck you with one punch,
Yeah.
but you've put on a good show and you've been entertaining. And so I kind of wanted to do something like that, because I like the Voldos, I like the Yoshimitsus, I like the weaker but more unusual characters. I dabbled with Malifaux a few years ago, and I played
Oh,
as the
cool.
Neverborn rather than just the outright power ones. I played with the debuffs, and I played with the weird, creepy, disjointed ones.
Yeah.
So I cut up the Blissful One and resculpted a lot of it to be like crab walking on her back, with claws for hands, because I
Uh-huh.
thought that would be like a weird, creepy spider walking woman as the leader.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, okay, so that's like a horror movie reference. And then I based the color scheme on the colors that you get in Silent Hill. So, dingy flesh, blood, like rusty blood red, rusty metal, everything very dingy. I mixed up my own contrast mix out of, I think, Grif Charger Grey and Guilliman Flesh, so that I could just slap that over it, make everything look dirty, everything
Yeah.
look very, very dingy, like the other side of Silent Hill.
Hmm.
And when I was building my list, I named all of them after monsters from Silent Hill in a hierarchy. So the bosses for the tougher ones, and like the really weak chaff enemies for the minions. So you have like Remnant and Greychild for the spear wielding ones,
Hmm.
and things like Void and Sepulchre for my joyous ones. And then after I'd done the list, I was like, okay, what would they look like? What would be a defining characteristic of the name or the character or the monster? So for Sepulchre, lots of skulls on the base and skulls on chains hanging from them.
Hmm.
Character Glutton, I gave him a butcher's cleaver and modelled on strips of skin hanging behind him. And I thought, okay, so he's the butcher, and well, they eat their flesh raw, but the cook of the warband. And the model Remnant, I cut off his arms and legs and did stumps and pegs legs. And I thought, okay, so he's the field rations. When they want something to eat, they cut off one of his arms or legs.
Hmm.
And so like him, and that kind of built the narrative from there. And when I said about like the composition changing according to the narrative, ever since I decided that Glutton was chopping bits off this other fighter for food, I've always put them in the same battle group together, because I thought they are, inseparable. One of them follows the other because he thinks it's his duty, and the other one follows him back because he's hungry. So that kind of inspires the
Yeah.
battle group and the way I play from there. Um, and then since then, when I've added allies, I've done them in a similar kind of color scheme and tried to also apply Silent Hill names that might
Hmm.
fit them. So I've got the Dark Oath Chieftain, who's actually modelled out of the Godsworn Hunt, the guy with the big sword,
Yeah. Yeah.
called Stalker, because that's why I did the color scheme. I converted one to be a Grey Shaman, but as a turn skin, because there was some old lore in the old world
Hmm.
about these chaos touched children who turn into essentially beastmen or werewolves at a certain time in their life. And I thought, what if they find this turn skin who's turning into a beast? So I modded him with beast legs,
Hmm.
but they treat him as a holy man, so he's got a staff. Um, and there was a monster called Feral, and I thought, okay, that name fits. I'll it sums up the character. And that was the second time I've done something like that. I did something for Kill Team a couple of years ago, where I named all of the characters after tarot cards and based the modeling and their personality after what they were. So Strength had like 4 arms, and he was like all roided out and bulked out.
Hmm.
Death was literally shaped. He had a scythe. Um, And it was the Wheel of Fate, was the guy with the huge plasma cannon, because he was just rolling the dice each time, and if he blew up, and that was destiny. So just trying to get from the theme into the modeling and the sculpting and the composition, and then the narrative came much later as I played some games and thought about how they interact. But that was very, very theme inspired. That warband, it's my first one, and then I hadn't really had much experience writing the narrative, so there's still only a little bit of background for them, but it's evolved, like you say, as you've played,
Right.
and they've got injured, and as you've got experience, that's written a bit more headcanon between them, and the interactions and relationships with how they operate as a warband.
And because you put so much work into the theme, is it kind of easier to do the narrative as it's going because you've themed so hard?
Yeah, definitely. Because I've tried to get them, like I said, like archetypes and some references to movies and pop culture, so they are all together, and then you can think, okay, they are definitely a warband. This guy is bigger than this guy, or this guy, would interact with that way, and then you build up the relationships in your head, because you're not starting fresh. You've got them together, kind of what they would like, and in that case the theme inspired the model, and then the model inspired the personality, and then that inspires the narrative. So it's just like an organic joining the dots.
Nice. All right, so yeah, for my second one, I'll do my Gloomspite Gits. So I've done the first half. I put the first half of their campaign on the channel a while back. For viewers, I promise I'll show the second half soon. I'm not quite done with it, but they're one of only 2 warbands I've got where I've actually written a short story. The first one was my Untamed Beasts, where I didn't have much narrative at all for them. I just tried doing a battle report where I took pictures of all the rounds, and then rather than reporting what happened in the battle, I wrote a short story from the point of view of the character who did the coolest thing in the battle. And that's, on my channel. It's one of my first videos, so it's cringily done a little bit, but anyone who's interested can go back in the archives and take a look. But the Gits were my second one, where it started just from a color scheme that I liked. I was basically just going with, I liked the box art, but I wanted brighter squigs. So I decided to try to paint them yellow. I'd also never done anything that was base yellow before, and I'd heard that it was hard, and it is a little harder than other colors. But if you devour a bunch of YouTube videos on how to paint yellow first, it can be a little easier. And so then I went with cloaks that would kind of be a complementary color to the yellow, so that kind of left me with this kind of bluish purple, kind of dusky night sky type of color for the cloaks, where it's not black, it's this sort of off black that is like the night sky. And then that kind of led me to this perfect mix where it's the squigs are yellow like the bad moon, and then the cloaks are dusky blue like the evening sky. And so then I made up this story where a squig loon boss is trying to capture squigs, specifically yellow squigs, which in the story are hard to find because most of them are red, right? And he's going around doing this because he hallucinated on mushrooms one time, saw the bad moon, and decided that the real way to get the bad moon's attention would be to have a massive army that looked like the bad moon. So the idea would be to have this massive army of squigs that were yellow like the bad moon, and all of them with cloaks like the night sky. And then a couple of them I've painted little I used glacier blue as the color, but little stars on the cloaks to be more like the night sky. And then I have a short story I've written. I haven't put up anywhere on the channel. I probably should. A short story I've written where he's sort of traveling around Gur, searching for yellow squigs, and going from one bad situation to another, and losing a lot of his minions doing it. And that kind of all just came out of the concept that came out of the color scheme that I went with.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do. Just because it got sillier and sillier as I was painting the models. Just because that's almost how Gits should be, right? They're such a weird group. And I basically just went with, I got the Warcry box for just, it's like 3 sneaky snufflers and 10 bounders. And then I got the Zarbag's Gits. I learned from it that goblins are kind of too small and spindly for me to want to paint enough of them to actually have an Age of Sigmar army. But what I love about Warcry is you can paint a faction, learn that it's not your favorite thing to paint, and then stop. And I don't feel like I've wasted my time because I still have this thing I can paint, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so now this Warband, even though I absolutely hated painting them, they're one of my favorite Warbands because, like, they play well. They've got a color scheme I love, even though I hated doing it. and you know, I get to sit them there, and I don't feel like it was a failure because I had a really good time, and I still get to play them.
Yeah, and also the fact, you know, the trying to cool down the bad moon by pretending to be the bad moon, that is exactly the kind of thing that they would do. So you got that internal that internal consistency. It would fit in with all the established canon, because that's, I think they've done similar things like that. That's grot logic, you know. It's like, hey, bad moon, we're bad moons too, do you want to hang out? And so you're making the narrative which is your own, but it's narrative which would fit in with the established lore, which makes it, again, even more rewarding because you feel like you're part of a bigger thing.
Yeah, so do you have one last warband or army that you want to kind of talk about how you made the narrative for it?
I do, yes. The other one is my Stormcast, which I've mentioned throughout the video, the Verdant Aegis. And it started with just a test model for a color scheme because I wanted to try to paint wood effect, you know, like almost like walnut interior on a 70s car. And so I did that on Paudrons and the Greaves and on the big shield, because it's like a nice big flat area to practice on. And I wanted a contrasting color, so I went for Ancient Bronze, which was green with brass over it, and then highlighted with steel, and then we've dulled down with a wash. And it ended up looking really good. And then I put the test model away for a few months because I was working on some other stuff. And then I realized that I did have enough to make a Warrior Chamber warband. So I got the Warrior Chamber cards, unfortunately about a month before the Grand Alliance book came out, but you know, you live and learn. And I was like, again, I was asking the questions, you know, where would they come from? Why would you be like that? And so I had the idea of, you know, forest guardians. My first thought was, you know, in some kind of forest temple, you know, and they come to life. They're all like automatons. But I didn't like that because that was too close to the original Stormcast, where they were just faceless robots.
Right. And a lot of people do that Stonecast color scheme, right? Like you see examples of that online a lot, which I think looks really good, but so many people have done it better than I would do it now that I could never want to do it now because I feel like it's been done.
I almost did that a while back, but like you said, you know, it would be so difficult to get it to look how you want to in your head. but yeah, I was reading some Black Library thing. I had the Black Library, the celebration where it has the short stories, and there was the Hamilcar Bear Eater where he's in the forest. It was the one, I won't spoil anything. It was the one with the tree at the end,
Hmm.
and and again, it's like, okay, here's this Stormcast, but he doesn't act like, a rank and file robot Stormcast. He had a previous life. He has a personality. He hangs out in the forest. He's very much a realm of beast, realm of life kind of dude.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking like that opened the door for me to be able to say, okay, so these had a former life. If they're in the forest, maybe they were a forest community. And I really liked in the old Warhammer, so like 6th edition, 7th edition, they would have little timelines. Like for the Hordes of Chaos, you would have the Empire books, and it'd have little paragraph, 1 or 2 paragraph stories,
Hmm.
just as flavor text, which could then inspire you to make your own little war bands or armies based on it.
Yeah.
And there were some recurring stories. I think it was um, Glumhoff, this little town. Everything bad happened to it, so it was burnt to the ground in the storm of chaos, and they rebuilt it. And then there was
Okay.
like this sinkhole which ate it, and so they rebuilt it. And then it got overrun by orcs, and so they rebuilt it. And it was just this cursed little hamlet where everybody was just like, "Oh, we're going to have to rebuild." They've come along and killed everyone again. We'll just rebuild. And I thought, okay, so they could be from this forest community in this deep forest, which is preyed on by beastmen and chaos. And they didn't have to be warriors, because that was one of the things that was expanded on in Age of Sigmar with Stormcast. You have scholars, you have poets, you have craftsmen, you have just normal civilians. It doesn't matter as long as you're brave. So I thought, okay,
Hmm.
how about if it's an entire town who got overrun by chaos, but they all wanted to save their town. They all fought back. They got completely wiped out, but Sigmar just saved this entire community and turned them into a warrior chamber, which now lives to try to protect other people, other forest dwellers and forest
Hmm.
travelers from chaos. So they've got very specific background, very specific focus. And so it went from then. And I was going, okay, what's the archetypes of the villagers? You would have somebody who was craftsman, because, hammer holders. And so I had somebody with a grand hammer who was like a union boss, who was a craftsman, and he was very belligerent, and he was very in favor of the common man against the tyranny of the oppressors. He was like a chief craftsman.
Yeah.
um, so when he became a liberator with a grand hammer, he really, really hates tyrants, and he really hates people who oppress other people. So, and he's got the
Hmm.
special rule where he can hit people really hard with a hammer if they're, you know, tough overlords. He's got the lay low the tyrants rule. Um, we've got people like the village priest, who's become a prosecutor, because he grabbed some relic hammers off the wall and defended his church with them. And they're led by a Lord Castellant, who was actually the town crier. And I thought it'd be interesting if in one of the
Right.
raids, the mayor got killed, but because everyone's used to hearing this guy's voice, he calls them all together, and he becomes the de facto village chief.
Yeah.
And he's now the leader of the war
And
band.
perfect for the
And instead of
defensive buffs that a Castellan gives out, right? Because he's yelling the warning just like a town crier would do in that
exactly.
situation. Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone trusts him, everyone knows him, everyone follows his orders. So he's the former town crier, and I was lucky enough to get the special, the female Protector Prime model,
Mm. Nice.
um, and so I use her as a Protector Prime, and she ran the bar, but everyone flocked to her, and she locked everyone in the cellar, and she just stood out there with this double-bladed sword and
Yeah.
protected the people in the cellar. So she's become so they've kind of bleached into their new lives. So I
Uh,
wrote all this background and all this archetypes before I even started doing the conversions, and then that informed what weapons they would have, what artifacts they would have, even what kind of pose they would have. Um, so that was very much narrative driven. I did all the narrative before I did everything else. Whereas with my other warband, it was theme first, then models, then narrative. So I just switched it up again. And mostly I do themed based warbands with a narrative
Mm-hmm.
backstory. This was the first time I did something entirely based on the narrative and wrote the story. I wrote individual biographies for all of the warbands,
Yeah.
which I think with small model count, it's okay. If I was to do it for goblins, you know, you wouldn't be able to do an individual biography for
No
like,
way.
you know, 15 goblins.
Yeah.
But with such a small model count, you're able to do that. And yeah, so some Grif Hounds just for a bit of fun. I painted up the Grif Hounds like my own cat and my own dog.
Nice.
And you know, just
Oh
a
yeah,
very
I
personal
saw the
touch in
pictures
there.
you posted on the Facebook group.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So again, I was just like trying to paint like a brindle greyhound as a Grif
Mm-hmm.
Hound, and yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. And his name is a little pun on my dog's name as well.
Nice.
I think it was, my dog's name is Spud, and I think it was a Lithuanian for potato, so that I named him. So again, like if you just happen to Google that name, it would come up with a potato, and it's like, okay, little stealth pun there.
Nice. Nice. Well, I think that's all we got for the people, but I I love it. Also that concept, the thing of just normal people being able to do Stormcast. I do hope that GW goes a little further in that direction because I feel like it makes sense, right? Because Sigmar, he can give you the body, right? So it doesn't matter if you were a badass in your past life. He can give you the body, he can give you the training. The only thing he can't give you is sort of the determination, right? So I
Yeah,
think it they could do a lot with that they haven't necessarily done as far as like um, how much your past life affects who you become as a Stormcast. I I have a lot of issues with a lot of parts of Space Marine um, story and backstory, but one thing I do think they do really well with Space Marines is the story of how they got chosen to be a Space Marine is like a huge part of the motivation for almost every
yeah,
Space Marine character. I'm blanking on the Raven Guard chapter master's name, but like he has a really good story. And then their Primarch, Korax, like growing up where he did is just like really perfect for him. And then, you know, all of the Space Wolves, they all get picked because they like looked great in a battle, but then almost got killed, and then they get brought up to the. It just like it
yeah,
provides the central motivation for almost every Space Marine, and they could. I think that they could learn from that a little bit with Stormcast. Um, yeah, I don't know, and so I love that you did that with the band all coming from the same town.
yeah.
Um,
And if there hadn't been Soul Wars, if there hadn't been version 2, if it would still be, you know, just the ranks of golden boys with no personality,
mhm,
I wouldn't really have been able to do that background. So it's a
right.
case of the lore and the background advancing by Games Workshop, which then in its wake people can be like, okay, yeah, this actually fits. This gives a context,
Mhm,
which I think is really necessary for narrative play. You need that context to fit into.
yeah.
And I was actually speaking with the manager of my local store the other day, and he was saying about some game systems have a really good avenue for narrative play. One of them kind of is Lord of the Rings, in
Mhm,
that, you know, you are fitting a story, but the big problem is that it's not your story; it's a story that's already written.
right.
You know, it's very you know, here's the story. You know, it's the book of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the Silmarillion, but you can't really have the wiggle room to put your own story in. Whereas for Age of
Mhm,
Sigmar with 40k, you're able to write your own story and have it dovetail into what's written already, because there's the context without having a prescribed narrative already written for you.
mhm. Yeah, and I think one thing is I just gave them an issue that I wish they'd learned better from Space Marines. But one thing I do think they
Mm.
did better with Stormcast than the Marines is worrying less about the exact color schemes, right? Like in 40k, there can be sort of a subculture of if you've painted it Ultramarines and you try to play it as White Scars, they're going to be mad at you. And like,
Yeah.
there's even sort of a tradition of if you've got the certain company numbering on your guy, then like, well, that's the company they come from, you know?
Yeah.
And
Or you put green shoulder pad rims, therefore it has to be that company, and that special character doesn't belong to that company, therefore you can't field him and you're doing everything wrong.
right, right. So this makes me actually want to kind of like pursue this with maybe some other videos of talking about sort of what lore and how much lore sort of serves creating your own narrative. Because I do think that they did a good job with that, with the sort of last round of Stormcast updates. And I think they do a pretty good job of that. Like with Warcry, all of the Warcry warbands just flesh out the world so well, and still let you kind of do whatever you want with them, especially the way that they all worship chaos, but none of them have decided what god to worship yet. So,
Yeah.
you know, you can read the Untamed Beast story and think like, well, there's a little bit of Nurgle in there, right? Because it's like the circle of life. But then there's also a bit of corn in there, right? Because they're hunting and that's like a blood kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, like, to me, when I read Untamed Beast narrative, I I think about how you could theme a Corn Untamed Beasts or a Nurgle Untamed Beasts equally well, and so that gives you this jumping off point to go to. And so I really like how Warcry is done that way, so that, you know, each of the war bands, some of them give you a little bit more than others, but almost all of them, they get you halfway to something really cool you can do yourself, and you just like what you said, using it as a jumping off point and doing something completely your own that still feels like a part of the world that they've given you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, really interesting to kind of think about when they've done that well and when they haven't. I think that'll be a topic for future videos for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So wrapping up, Adam, thank you so much for coming on. Uh,
Pleasure.
so you might know him as, you know, the most helpful guy in the Warcry Facebook group. He's always on there, you know, answering good questions. I know I've answered a question or two, and then he's kind of chimed in, and I've been like, oh man, I wish I'd remembered that. So, yeah, I often see your presence in there. You're really helpful to the community that way. Yeah, anything you want to leave him with as you sign off, man?
Not really. I think we've covered most of the things, but like I said, I think the word is the potential. The fact that we've been given this potential to take something and then make it our own. And I think Warcry to date is the one that's given us the most potential, the most design space, and the most narrative space to make something our own. So I'm just really, really happy that we've got that opportunity, and I'm going to explore it as much as I can.
Awesome. I can't think of a better way to end it than that. So thanks so much. I'll be back with more videos in the future, and until then, may all your rolls be crits.